Imagine, imagine dying on a foreign planet.
Hmm.
You're light years from home. The environment is just completely hostile. And, well, you take your last breath.
Which is, I mean, a terrifying thought on its own.
Right. And on Earth, that's just the end of the story. The biological machine stops, the book closes, and the rest is silence. But on the planet Yaenddarr, dying is really just where the actual horror,
Or the curriculum, really.
exactly, the curriculum begins.
Yeah.
Because imagine that instead of resting in peace, the unresolved trauma, the fear and the pure agony you felt in those final moments literally detaches from your corpse.
Physically detaches. It's not a metaphor.
Yeah, physically.
Hmm.
It seeps into the local water supply as this hyper-corrupted sludge, and then it crawls into the nearest jungle, and it manifests as an immortal, insatiably hungry shadow monster built entirely out of your worst day. So welcome to Yaenddarr.
It is wild, and that is the grim reality for any off-worlders on this planet.
Hmm.
Because the ecosystem of Yaenddarr possesses this literal mechanical immune system for processing grief, memory, and death.
It's basically a sentient world, right?
Oh, absolutely. History there is not recorded in some dusty archive or a forgotten server farm. History on this planet is a physical, vibrating force. It's etched into the light of conscious stars and burned into the bark of living trees. And, I mean, if you don't understand how this planet processes memory, you simply cannot survive it.
Which brings us to our mission for you today. If you are sitting there commuting or, prepping for a meeting, or if you are just the curious third person in this room with us who loves the crazy architecture of universe building, you are in the exact right place.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We're taking a massive deep dive into the living world of Yaenddarr today. Specifically, we are zooming right into the fairy realms. We're going to dissect the cosmic engine that powers their civilization.
The Magi Star.
Yes, the Magi Star. And we are going to explore how the inhabitants of this planet literally weaponize intent, how they harvest trauma and, navigate the incredibly treacherous loops of life and death.
It's a lot, but to even begin grasping the gravitational weight of the cosmic magic at play here, we really have to start at the heart of the realm. I mean, we need to look at a singular, pivotal meeting between three figures who essentially act as the catalyst for an entire new era on Yaenddarr.
Right, the big three.
Exactly. We have Lycaios, a celestial being who is literally starborn. Then we have Alara, a Florian, which is basically a plant-based humanoid whose biology is completely tied to the forest. And finally, we have Princess Anya, the heir to the fairy realm.
But before we get to that actual meeting, I feel like we need to map out where they are standing. Because if you hear fairy realm, you probably think of, like, a quaint Tinkerbell-style woodland, right?
Yeah, humans always default to that.
Totally. But this is not that. This is a formidable, pure enchantment zone. We're talking about a biome dominated by towering fungal structures, like mushrooms the size of human skyscrapers, with caps that form entire city districts.
And don't forget the crystalline caverns.
Oh man, the caverns. They don't just reflect light, they actually refract it in ways that physically bend the perception of time. Plus, you have these floating gardens suspended in the atmosphere through sheer geomagnetic magic and an entire ecosystem of flora that is, frankly, aggressively bioluminescent.
Which is such a key detail, actually. The bioluminescence isn't just there to make the place look pretty for a festival. In a realm that is so deeply connected to the ethereal star system, light is actually a medium of data transfer.
Wait, like fiber optics?
Kind of. The
Mhm.
flora in the fairy realm glows because it is constantly metabolizing ambient magic from the Magi Star. And right at the center of this sprawling, neon-lit fungal metropolis is Queen Serenity. She rules from a throne carved entirely out of raw moonstone.
And her palace sits on top of iridescent clouds, right?
Yeah, it serves as the geopolitical and magical anchor of the entire territory. It's incredibly imposing.
So in the middle of all this sensory overload, there's a massive festival taking place. And Lycaios, the celestial boy, and Alara, the earthbound Florian, they take the stage to perform. They start to sing.
Which, given their backgrounds, creates an insane contrast.
Exactly. You have Lycaios with this soaring celestial harmony. It's literally the sound of the cosmos.
Mm.
And then Alara's voice is grounded, earthy, fueled by the deep passions of the forest. And, the acoustics of a giant mushroom kingdom must be wild on their own.
Definitely.
But Princess Anya is in the audience and she decides to intervene. She uses her fairy magic to physically grab their voices in the air and weave them together.
And this requires a pretty massive breakdown of how fairy magic actually operates, because Anya isn't casting a spell in the traditional, waving a wand and saying an incantation kind of way.
Right, there's no spell book here.
No, fairy magic is governed entirely by intent. It is the physical manifestation of sheer willpower imposing itself on reality. So when Anya hears these two contrasting frequencies, the cold, vast emptiness of celestial energy and the warm, dense chaos of Florian energy, her intent forces them to synthesize.
She acts like a magical DJ mixing board.
Basically. She takes their raw auditory output and braids it into this harmonic frequency that honestly hasn't been heard in centuries.
And the outcome is, well, it's a geopolitical earthquake. The performance completely transcends language. The sources note that the audience is moved to tears, and the music literally echoes to the farthest corners of the fairy realm.
Just think about the acoustic payload required to project a single song across an entire kingdom.
It's mind-blowing. So for several nights, this trio just becomes the absolute center of gravity for the festival. Anya ends up taking Lycaios and Alara on this sprawling tour of her home. She shows off the floating gardens, the sprites, the ancient unicorns, all of it, and then she brings them to the absolute pinnacle, Queen Serenity's sanctum in the iridescent clouds.
Stepping into Queen Serenity's sanctum is like stepping out of linear time entirely. The space is suspended between myth and reality, lined with these shimmering tapestries that act as living records of ancient lore.
It sounds super intimidating.
Oh, it is. And Serenity is not merely a figurehead. She is a being of unparalleled strategic and magical wisdom. The moment she sees Lycaios and Alara, and she understands the harmonic frequency they generated with her daughter, she recognizes the prophecy they carry.
She knows exactly what's up.
She realizes that the song they created actually stirred primordial energy.
So the queen basically looks at them and says, the harmony you created woke something up, and now that harmony must learn to defend itself. She extends an invitation for them to train under her.
Which sounds like an incredible honor.
Right. If you're like Lycaios or Alara, you're probably thinking, great, we sing a beautiful song, the queen recognizes us as the prophesied saviors, we'll get a nice little training montage of lifting rocks with our minds, and then we go save the world.
But that is not what happens at all.
Not even close. The very next morning, they arrive at the training grounds expecting, basic sparring drills. But their newly appointed mentor, this fairy named Lloyd, just drops a massive bomb on them.
Yeah, Lloyd informs them that Queen Serenity has not enrolled them in a cozy, personalized boot camp. She has formally entered them into the annual fairy games.
Okay, and this is where I have to throw a flag on the play. Let's just look at this from a human perspective for a second. Queen Serenity discovers two highly vulnerable, magically inexperienced teenagers who carry the literal salvation of the universe in their vocal cords. And her immediate instinct is to toss them into a gladiatorial arena. I mean, the fairy games aren't some high school track meet. We're talking about a centuries-old tournament that gathers the absolute most lethal, highly trained participants from every fold of the fairy realms.
Pixies, dryads, windwalkers, everyone.
Yeah, and it culminates in an all-out battle royale. It's like finding out you were the chosen one and then immediately getting drafted into the Hunger Games. So I have to ask, is Queen Serenity a visionary? Or is she just ruthlessly manipulative?
I would argue she is an absolute, uncompromising visionary. And to understand why, you really have to look at the curriculum Lloyd designs for them. Lloyd hands them a strict 120-day plan.
Only 4 months.
Exactly. He has 4 months to prepare them to survive a tournament that other beings have trained centuries for. And the plan is broken into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 is elemental mastery. Phase 2 is tactical unity. Phase 3 is emotional fortitude. And Phase 4 is adaptive sparring.
It's basically a magical crash course.
Serenity knows that coddling them in a private sanctum would only teach them theoretical magic. And theoretical magic gets you killed on Yaenddarr.
Okay, but break down those phases for me. Because having 120 days to master the elements seems biologically impossible unless there's some kind of trick to it.
Well, the trick goes right back to that core tenet of fairy magic we talked about earlier, intent. Phase 1, elemental mastery, isn't about sitting there memorizing spellbooks. It's about learning to impose your will on the environment until the environment obeys you.
So no chanting or drawing circles.
None of that. For a Florian like Alara, it means forcing her own root structures to pull specific nutrients to augment her bark. For Lycaios, it means trying to literally trap starlight in his bare hands.
Wow. And then Phase 2.
Phase 2, tactical unity, forces them to replicate what they did on stage with Anya, but in a combat scenario. They have to weave their contrasting energies together to constantly cover each other's blind spots.
See, it's phase 3 that really terrifies me. Emotional fortitude. How do you even train for that in a glowing mushroom kingdom?
By exposing them to psychological stress that mimics the horrors outside the fairy realm. Remember, magic on Yaenddarr is highly reactive to the user's emotional state.
Because it's all based on intent.
Right. If you panic while channeling celestial energy, you don't just miss your target, you could potentially rupture your own nervous system.
That is brutal.
It is. So emotional fortitude training likely involves intense sensory deprivation, exposure to illusionary terrors, and really just learning to compartmentalize fear so that their intent remains perfectly pure, even when their lives are actively being threatened.
Which perfectly tees up phase 4, adaptive sparring. Basically simulating the pure chaos of the battle royale. As Lloyd tells them, you are not chosen because you're ready. You're chosen so that you become ready.
The queen isn't testing their physical strength at all. She is actively forging their psychological resilience.
Because victory in this universe isn't won by just punching harder than the other guy. Is won with restraint, resonance, and the ability to adapt to terrifying new paradigms.
And that adaptability is put to the absolute ultimate test the moment they step out of the training grounds and into the broader reality of the fairy realm. Because while the mushroom skyscrapers and the floating gardens are breathtaking, the fairy realm is not an isolated paradise.
Not at all.
It actually functions as the central nervous system for Yaenddarr's interdimensional transit.
Yeah, this part blew my mind when I was reading the sources. The fairy realm is essentially a cosmic airport hub. It contains this massive, sprawling network of portals leading to entirely different dimensions.
A lot of different dimensions.
We're talking about the dream realms, the nightmare realms, the shadow realms, the earth realms, and the nether realms, just all physically connecting through this one kingdom.
And controlling that transit hub obviously gives the fairies immense geopolitical leverage, but it also makes them the prime target for incursions. And right at this point in the timeline, the network is bleeding.
Things are falling apart.
Yeah. Unauthorized, corrupted portals have been tearing open within the pristine borders of the Elysium forest. Human trespassers are stumbling through, which, is a nuisance, but the real existential threat coming through these tiers are the shadows.
Okay, let's circle back to that horrific scenario we started the deep dive with, the shadows. For you listening, I really want to emphasize that these are not just dark, spooky figures hiding behind trees. They are a biological and magical plague.
To fully grasp the horror of a shadow, we have to examine the ecology of death on Yaenddarr, specifically the Elixin waters.
Right, the filtration system.
Exactly. The Elixin lakes are these sacred bodies of water that act as a spiritual filtration system for the entire planet. When a native being dies and their body enters the water, the Elixin gently strips away their unresolved trauma, their fear, their agony, basically purifying the soul for whatever comes next.
The planet easily digests native grief.
Yes. But when an off-worlder dies, like a human or some other alien entity, their psychological makeup is entirely incompatible with the Elixin filtration system. The trauma doesn't dissolve, it curdles.
The off-worlder's agony just reacts violently with the sacred water, creating this hyper-corrupted, toxic substance known as Ixor. And this Ixor is heavy, right?
Very heavy. It sinks, flows downstream, and pools deep within the most hostile environment on the planet, which is the savage jungle. There, it forms these massive, festering inkwells. And from these inkwells of pure, concentrated alien trauma, shadows are born.
So they're walking immortal manifestations of someone else's worst nightmare. They don't have a biological imperative to reproduce or build cities or anything. Their only instinct is to just consume and corrupt.
And the absolute worst part is they are functionally immortal.
Yeah, you can't just kill them.
No. If you manage to defeat a shadow in combat, you haven't solved the problem at all. The entity just dissolves into a noxious mist, floats back to the savage jungle, drips back into the inkwell, and resurrects itself. And often, it comes back stronger and more resistant to whatever weapon you just used to kill it.
And this is the enemy Lloyd tasks like Hyos and Alara with hunting down. Their mission is to navigate the Elysium forest and seal the corrupted portals that are allowing these shadows to bypass the fairy realm's defenses.
It is a grueling, relentless campaign. The sources indicate they spend what feels like 2 entire years inside the fairy realm executing this one mission.
Which means time clearly operates on a completely different axis in the fairy realm. But 2 years of hunting immortal trauma monsters is going to change a person. And we do see radical evolutionary leaps in both of them.
Massive leaps.
Like Hyos, the boy literally made of starlight, actually begins metabolizing the darkness. He starts absorbing shadow essence into his own celestial biology to understand it and neutralize it. But it is Alara's evolution that, frankly, fundamentally rewrites the rules of this universe.
Alara achieves something that borders on the miraculous. She masters solar purification.
Walk us through the biology of that.
Well, as a Florian, she is essentially an ambulatory plant. She relies heavily on photosynthesis. But typically, a Florian can only absorb so much ambient light. During this 2-year campaign, though, she discovers these highly potent solar crystals in a region called Blossomville.
And she doesn't just, put the crystals in a necklace or her pocket. She weaponizes her own anatomy.
Yes, she figures out how to rapidly manifest extra branches, broad leaves, and these dense bark structures on her own body, all specifically designed to act as highly efficient solar panels.
So cool.
She dramatically increases her surface area just to absorb the radiation from these crystals. She saturates her cellular structure with pure solar energy until she is practically glowing with it.
So when she faces the shadows now, she completely abandons the traditional combat methodology of trying to just chop them to pieces. Instead, she envelops them in this intensely concentrated solar radiation. And she doesn't just burn them to ash either.
No, she actively rewrites their spiritual DNA. She takes these immortal, destructive entities of pure, concentrated trauma, and she purifies them. The resulting reaction transforms the shadows into entirely new entities called solar fae.
They go from being nightmare sludge to harmless, radiant beings of pure light. Think about the sheer willpower, the intent required to grab a creature made of depression and agony and force it to become a creature of light. It's literal cosmic alchemy.
It is the ultimate expression of the toxic waste to solar panels analogy, and the geopolitical ramifications of this are staggering.
How so?
By purifying the shadows, instead of just temporarily dispersing them, Alara permanently removes soldiers from the enemy's board. But more importantly, she introduces a massive, brand new energy source to the fairy ecosystem.
Right. Queen Serenity's kingdom suddenly has access to an abundance of these newly minted solar fae. The fairy realms immediately begin harvesting and collecting this ambient solar energy, which catapults them into an era of unprecedented energy independence.
It completely changes their society.
They use this new power source to fuel rapid technological and magical advancements. I mean, Alara didn't just win a skirmish, she altered the planetary economy. She turned an existential planetary threat into a symbiotic relationship.
And all of this intense realm-altering activity, the sealing of portals, the creation of solar fae, the stabilization of the Elysium forest, it all serves as the prologue to an event the entire kingdom has been holding its breath for.
Princess Anya's awakening.
Exactly. The highly anticipated awakening of Princess Anya. The realm is securing its borders so that when Anya comes into her full power, she inherits a stabilized kingdom rather than a war zone.
Which naturally forces us to zoom out even further.
Yeah.
Because we've seen Anya's acoustic magic, we've seen Alara's solar alchemy, and Lycao's metabolizing shadows.
Yeah.
The sheer caloric and magical expenditure of all this is astronomical.
It violates basic laws of conservation of energy.
Completely. Unless there is a massive external battery powering the entire planet. So where is all this juice actually coming from?
That battery isn't actually on the planet at all. To understand the root of fairy magic, we have to look up into the ethereal star system. In the universe of Yaenddarr, astronomy is inextricably linked to theology and magic.
The stars aren't just balls of gas.
Exactly. Stars are not just massive spheres of burning plasma undergoing nuclear fusion. They are sentient. They are imbued with immense, ancient consciousness.
That is such a staggering concept. A thinking star. You have the solar star, which acts as a beacon of raw vitality and physical energy. You have the lunar star, which projects frequencies of gentle healing and temporal manipulation. But the crown jewel of the system, the absolute crucible of reality-bending power, is the Magi star.
The Magi star is the source code of all magic on Yaenddarr. And here is the critical geopolitical reality you have to understand. The fairy race controls access to the Magi star.
They hold the monopoly on the universe's main generator. No wonder Queen Serenity is so fiercely protective of her borders. The fairies get to dictate who gets to draw from the well.
It's ultimate power.
In fact, the sources mention that the fairies have recently forged a highly strategic alliance with the Lunar Kingdom, granting them limited access to the Magi star.
And this alliance is just a perfect example of synergy. The Lunarites are a highly advanced civilization specializing in engineering and technology, but their native magic is limited mostly to healing and temporal shifts.
So they need the raw power.
Right. By granting them access to the raw, untamed reality warping power of the Magi Star, the fairies are allowing the Lunarites to blend high-tech engineering with cosmic magic. We are talking about unlocking completely new frontiers of magitech weaponry, infrastructure, and dimensional transit.
But, the most fascinating output of the Magi Star isn't the energy it radiates. It's what is physically born from its core.
The eunuchs.
The eunuchs, let's talk about them because they are wild.
The eunuchs are aeon beings. They do not evolve from single-celled organisms. They are spontaneously generated from the conscious will of the Magi Star itself. Because they are born directly from the crucible of magic, they possess an inherent, terrifying level of magical potential from the moment they exist.
And who swoops in to act as their mentors, guides, and protectors? The fairies. It's a brilliant political maneuver. The fairies don't just control the star, they control the education and deployment of the demigods born from it.
It's a closed loop of power. The eunuchs are naturally predisposed to the biological manipulation of organic matter. They are basically the ultimate healers and emergency responders of Yaenddarr. But their capabilities are strictly categorized by their inherent resonance with the star, dividing them into tiers.
So Tier 1 makes up the vast majority of the eunuchs population, right?
Yes, these are your regenerative healers. If you get your arm chopped off in a border skirmish, a Tier 1 eunuchs can rapidly accelerate your cellular division to regrow the limb. They cure systemic diseases, reconstruct damaged tissue, stabilize fractured auras, and detoxify magical poisoning.
They are the backbone of the medical infrastructure.
Exactly, particularly in high-casualty areas like the Cosmosis Coliseum.
But Tier 2 is where the biological laws of the universe just begin to break down entirely. These are the rare, revival-capable eunuchs. A Tier 2 eunuch doesn't just accelerate healing, they can reverse catastrophic biological cessation. The sources explicitly state they possess the ability to, quote, revive fresh decapitations.
Which is just insane to think about.
Pause right there. Reviving a fresh decapitation. How does that even work from a physiological standpoint?
It requires a simultaneous, multi-layered manipulation of reality. The eunuch has to instantaneously halt cellular necrosis in the brain, manually reattach the spinal column at a microscopic level, fuse the severed vascular system, and forcefully reignite the electrical impulses of the heart and brainstem.
While the clock is ticking.
Exactly. But more importantly, they have to grab the soul before it completely detaches from the physical anchor.
They literally pull a dying soul back into a corpse. The sources call this the third path of death on Yaenddarr. It's the ultimate loophole. And if that isn't wild enough, there is a tier above them. Tier 3.
The true resurrection level eunuchs.
These are beings of pure myth. The archives suggest there are only 3 known to exist across the entire history of the planet.
Because the distinction between Tier 2 revival and Tier 3 resurrection is basically the difference between a medic and a god. Revival, no matter how extreme, like reattaching a head, is still fundamentally a biological intervention. The soul hasn't fully crossed over yet. Resurrection, however, means the soul has departed. The biological anchor is fully dead.
So to resurrect someone, a eunuch has to engage in soul thread anchoring. They have to actively project their own consciousness into the death realm, navigate its horrors, locate the specific soul, negotiate or force its release, maintain absolute emotional neutrality so their own intent isn't corrupted, and then pull the soul back across the dimensional barrier into a reconstructed body.
The metaphysical authority required to execute a true resurrection is incomprehensible. A single lapse in concentration, just a single flicker of fear while navigating the death realm, and the eunuch's own soul could be severed and trapped forever.
Which brings us to the sociological twist that absolutely fascinates me. You have an entire race of beings born from a conscious star. They possess the ultimate power over life and death. They have the ability to literally cure death.
Right.
But what do 90% of the eunuchs actually choose to do with their immortal lives? They join a scholar caste. They become arcane librarians, historians, magic researchers, and spell engineers.
It seems baffling from a human perspective. We view medical intervention as the highest moral calling, but the eunuch's perspective is entirely different.
It's like discovering you have the superpower to pull souls back from the void, but deciding the metaphysical paperwork and the emotional toll are just too exhausting. So you opt for a desk job cataloging ancient scrolls instead. I mean, how does an entire society of demigods justify abandoning the emergency room for the library?
It really comes down to the psychological burden of immortality and the nature of their origin. They are born from the Magi Star, which is not just a battery, but a massive repository of cosmic consciousness and knowledge.
They feel a connection to the data.
Exactly. Culturally, the eunuchs feel a much stronger gravitational pull toward studying the star, decoding its mysteries, and preserving the memories of the world than they do toward the endless bloody triage of battlefield medicine.
It's a self-preservation mechanism. Resurrecting a soul requires engaging with the most traumatic, dangerous dimensions of reality. If you do that enough times, you inevitably fracture your own psyche.
You'd go mad.
Yeah, they look at the horrific loops of trauma on Yaenddarr and decide that recording the history of the suffering is a safer, more sustainable contribution than constantly trying to reverse it. They view themselves as the ultimate archivists of the universe, not its paramedics.
But, if the eunuchs are sequestered and their libraries acting as the scholars of the cosmos, it begs a logistical question about the fairies. The fairies are clearly an active, dynamic, politically aggressive race. They aren't sitting in dusty rooms reading books.
So how does fairy culture preserve its own vast history?
Well, the answer is that they don't read history. They download it directly into their nervous systems. We are moving from the physical magic of the Magi Star to the metaphysical preservation of history through a phenomenon called star resonance.
Star resonance, let's dig into that because this is where the magic system gets incredibly layered.
To unpack star resonance, we need to revisit how fairy magic shapes reality. Earlier, we established that fairy magic is dictated by intent. When a fairy, or someone trained by them, wants to cast a spell, their intent physically manifests as a glowing glyph in the air.
Which is a crucial distinction from other realms on the planet. For example, in the dream realm, magic and glyphs are shaped purely by emotion.
That distinction is massive. Emotion is volatile, reactive, and often subconscious. Intent is deliberate, focused, and completely conscious. The fairies build their magic on absolute, crystalline focus, and this reliance on intent is exactly how they interface with the lunar highway.
The lunar highway. It sounds like a Mario Kart track, but it is definitely not a physical road. It is a living planetary network of mnemonic currents. Think of it as a subterranean river of pure memory, cosmic echoes, and the accumulated historical data of the entire ethereal star system.
It connects realms, dreams, and timelines all at once.
It's basically the cosmic internet, but instead of using a modem to log on, you use your soul. And we get to see the ultimate jaw-dropping application of this network through the character of Umok.
Umok is fascinating.
He really is. Umok is a Florian elder, much older, more grizzled than Alara, who eventually becomes a frontline champion of the fairy realm.
Umok's ascension is one of the most mechanically fascinating events in the sources. Queen Serenity recognizes that Umok possesses the necessary trauma and clarity to survive the process. She summons him to the Moondial Spire.
What's the Moondial Spire?
It's an architectural marvel where intersecting timelines and cosmic currents physically spiral into harmony.
So she brings him there, and she tells him, the lunar highway is a thread only walked by those who know pain and direction. And then she presents him with the gifted lunar star.
And this isn't some badge of honor or a medal. It is a literal seed of condensed, sentient moonfire that has been waiting for eons to find a host with the correct biological and psychological resonance.
And the fusion ritual that follows is a masterclass in Yaenddarr's brutal biology. Umok doesn't just hold the seed, he integrates it into his core. As the condensed moonfire strikes his Florian heartwood, his entire anatomy aggressively restructures itself to accommodate the energy.
It's incredibly violent. His physical body cracks open. The standard wooden thorns of his Florian biology calcify and shift into razor-sharp, silver-threaded blades.
But the most vital change happens on the surface of his bark. Right?
Yes. Intricate glowing glyphs forcefully carve themselves across his arms and chest, forming shifting celestial constellations right on his skin. His spinal column lights up with what the sources call lunar tether lines. He basically ceases to be just a Florian and transforms into the rooted lunar ascendant.
By absorbing the seed, Umok has forcefully evolved his own nervous system into a biological antenna capable of receiving the frequencies of the lunar highway. He taps right into the mnemonic current.
And immediately, the glyphs on his bark begin burning with translated data. He receives a direct, unimpeded broadcast from Celestria, the primordial eon of lunar energy.
And the message Umok translates is just chilling in its brevity. He says, prepare the way. The Eon Star awakens. The Starborn do not return. They arrive.
Which is such a powerful line.
It is. Now, normally in a fantasy setting, a cryptic message like that is just a prophecy that characters spend 3 books trying to decipher. But on Yaenddarr, this isn't a metaphor. It is a physical override command sent to the ecosystem.
Exactly. The message is a planetary warning system bracing the cosmic ecosystem for a massive impact. The Eon Star Awakening means the fundamental gravitational and magical physics of the realm are about to shift entirely.
This just proves that on Yaenddarr, memory and magic are the exact same substance. The fairy race preserves history through star resonance. They don't just remember the past, they physically resonate with it. Umok becomes a living archive. The history of the cosmos is literally coursing through his veins, rewriting his DNA in real time.
To put this into a terrestrial perspective for you, imagine if human DNA worked this way. We know human DNA carries the biological history of our ancestors, adaptations to ancient plagues, the physiological remnants of prehistoric diets.
But it's a passive record.
Right, it's passive.
If human memory worked like star resonance, every time you felt a deep wave of nostalgia about your childhood, your skin would start glowing, you would begin levitating, and you would involuntarily start speaking ancient, forgotten Sumerian truths because your brain suddenly tuned in to the historical frequency of humanity.
That is the level of immediate weaponized memory Omok is dealing with.
And we see the combat application of this weaponized memory almost immediately, don't we?
We do. Umuk engages in a sparring rematch against the Royal Wingguard. Before his ascension, Umuk fought like a bruiser. His power was raw, heavy, and sometimes kind of feral. But as the rooted lunar ascendant, his fighting style completely transforms.
The sources say he fights with perfect syntax. He isn't just reacting to punches, he is reading the physical intent of his opponents before they even move. He doesn't try to dominate the fight with brute force. He merely corrects their motion, the way gravity corrects the trajectory of a thrown rock.
His direct connection to the lunar highway gives him a state of absolute clarity that no amount of physical training could ever overcome.
Which serves as a brilliant thematic pivot for the ecosystem of Yaenddarr. We have just examined what happens when a being processes memory and trauma with absolute clarity and intent. Umok ascends to a state of near-perfect grace.
But what happens when that clarity is absent?
Exactly. What happens when a creature dies, and instead of processing their trauma with intent, they are entirely consumed by it?
Yeah.
We have to leave the celestial heights of the fairy realm now and descend into the absolute grit and horror of the wildling field and the savage jungle.
We need to contrast two very distinct, deeply brutal paths of rebirth. Let's begin with the Farah rebirth.
Okay, set the scene for the Ferris.
The wildling field is a biome populated by apex predators known as Farahs. These are hyper-carnivorous, incredibly aggressive beasts whose entire existence is defined by hunting, killing, and inevitably being killed violently.
It's a brutal life cycle.
Yeah.
When a fair is torn apart in the wildling field, its physical remains eventually end up in the Elixin lakes. Now, earlier we talked about how the Elixin waters gently purify the trauma of native beings.
Yes.
But the Ferris die with such an overwhelming amount of adrenaline, rage, and sudden terror that the water cannot easily digest it.
When a Farah is reforming in the sacred waters, the sheer concentration of their violent trauma causes the Elixin lakes to literally boil. The water reacts violently to the psychic payload, and because the beast lacks the higher cognitive function to process its own death with intent, it does not come back peaceful.
Not at all. The rebirth is entirely fueled by raw, unadulterated fury. They respawn out of the boiling water completely mindless. Their brains only retain the muscle memory of the predators that killed them, and they are driven by a singular, consuming instinct to destroy whatever is in front of them.
This phenomenon creates a collective, subconscious rage across the species that the sources refer to as the Fury.
The fury, it sounds terrifying.
It isn't just a mood, it is an embodied specter made of failed transformations, echoing screams, and blind instinct. The Pharaohs, trapped in this loop, just throw themselves blindly at the Florian sentinels guarding the borders, over and over, dying and respawning in an endless grinder of violence.
It's the most horrific video game logic imaginable. Imagine you are playing a brutally hard game, and every time the boss kills you, you respawn. But you don't respawn with a clear head. You respawn retaining all the controller-smashing, blood-boiling anger from your previous death.
And that anger is the only thing your brain can process.
Exactly. You just keep throwing your avatar at the meat grinder until your mind goes completely numb.
The only way out of the Pharaoh loop is through sheer attrition. By dying and rebirthing hundreds, perhaps thousands of times, the Elixin waters very slowly, violently filter out the madness. Each agonizing death burns away a microscopic layer of that fury.
It takes so long.
Eventually, after countless traumatic loops, the beast emerges not as a raging monster, but as a cleared one.
A cleared one. They finally regain the capacity for intention. They find peace. But looking at this system, I really have to ask you, Is the planetary intelligence of Yaenddarr inherently cruel for designing a system that forces these animals through 1,000 torturous deaths? Or is it a perfectly designed, brutally efficient machine for eventually manufacturing peace?
I think it is the ultimate utilitarian meat grinder. Nature on Yaenddarr does not care about the comfort of the individual. It only cares about the eventual purification of the whole. It is an involuntary, trauma-driven evolution. The beast has no choice.
Right.
But we see the exact opposite philosophical approach to evolution in the second path of rebirth, the rite of flame.
If the Pharaoh rebirth is a prison of blind instinct, the rite of flame is a crucible of absolute conscious calibration. The rite takes place in the savage jungle, which is arguably the deadliest biome on the planet. We are talking about prehistoric, suffocating heat, toxic flora, and localized gravitational pressure that will literally crush the internal organs of the unprepared.
The Rite of Flame is a trial undertaken only by elite champions. In this specific cycle, 5 champions enter the jungle. Umuk, Leora, who is a young Florian, Moran, an Undine tide sculptor, Kilo, and Thin. The crucial difference here is that participation is entirely voluntary.
No one forces them into the jungle.
No one. And before the physical violence of the trial even begins, they face a massive psychological barrier. They gather in the Ashwood Circle, surrounded by the oppressive heat, and must individually touch the flame seed.
And this isn't a test of magical prowess, is it?
Not at all. They aren't required to cast a spell or prove their physical strength. The seed demands something much harder. They must speak a single, unvarnished, raw truth about their own deepest flaws. A confession.
The confessions are a mechanism for stripping away ego, because the jungle will kill anyone fighting with arrogance. The flame seed requires absolute emotional vulnerability so that the champion's intent is laid completely bare.
And the truths they offer are incredibly heavy, revealing the psychological baggage they all carry. Umak, the grizzled veteran, touches the seed and says, "I have killed without hating and lived without name."
Which is an admission of his own profound detachment and emptiness.
Then Leora, the young Florian who constantly feels overshadowed by the elders, touches it and confesses, "I am not brave, I am burning too slowly." She admits her deep-seated imposter syndrome and fear of inadequacy.
Varen, the Undine tide sculptor whose entire culture is built on fluid dominance, admits, "I feel nothing when I win. That's why I must test." It's the confession of an adrenaline junkie desperately looking for a limit he just can't beat.
Kilo proudly states he bleeds for fun, showcasing a really dangerous sadism. And Thin simply stays silent, completely refusing to engage with the vulnerability at all.
By speaking these truths, they set the baseline for their evolution. The trial isn't about surviving mindless violence like the Ferris. It's about proving that they can maintain this conscious, painful self-awareness while the environment actively tries to murder them.
And the environment absolutely massacres them.
It really does. The toll of the Rite of Flame is catastrophic. Out of the 5 champions who enter the jungle, only Umak and Leora actually manage to advance. The others are violently broken. Varan, the undefeated tide sculptor, literally loses his arm. Kilo has his face entirely shredded by the jungle's defenses.
But this is where the mechanics of Yaenddarr's rebirth system shine. They are not discarded as failures. The survivors and the maimed alike are carried back and placed into the Elixir Lakes to heal.
But because they chose to undergo the trial voluntarily, and because they entered the jungle with profound emotional clarity and conscious intent, the water reacts totally differently.
The Elixir doesn't boil with rage like it does for the pharaohs. It recognizes the intent of their sacrifice. The waters gently cocoon their broken bodies in soothing, intricate water glyphs. The healing process isn't just a repair job, it is a rapid, conscious evolution.
Right. Farron's severed stump doesn't just scar over, it buds with new, magically dense tissue promising a completely different kind of power. Leora's bark is infused with ember spores that swirl gently around her, symbolizing that she is finally burning at her own pace.
Their bodies and souls are elevated because they use their trauma as a tool for growth, rather than letting the trauma use them.
The contrast is just brilliant. The Pharaoh path is an involuntary prison where trauma commands the biology. The Rite of Flame is a voluntary crucible where intent commands the trauma. It proves the fundamental thesis of Yaenddarr, that power on this planet is not derived from how hard you can punch. It is derived entirely from the clarity with which you understand your own pain.
Whether we are looking at Alara forcing a shadow to become light, Umuk downloading the history of a star system into his nervous system, or Leora surviving the crushing heat of the savage jungle through sheer self-awareness, the rule remains absolute. Clarity is the ultimate weapon.
We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today, unpacking the heavy, intricate mechanics of a world that just refuses to let anything be forgotten. We started in the bioluminescent mushroom skyscrapers of the fairy realm, breaking down how Princess Anya manipulated the acoustic intent of Lycaios and Alara to wake up the cosmos.
We examined the brutal geopolitics of the fairy games, proving that Queen Serenity's ruthless 120-day curriculum was a necessary forge for their survival. We dissected the ecological horror of the Shadows, how alien trauma curdles into immortal monsters, and how Ilara revolutionized planetary energy by purifying them into solar fae.
We looked up at the ethereal star system to understand the conscious Magi star and analyzed the fascinating psychological burden of the eunuchs, these demigods who choose the quiet safety of the library over the soul-shredding trauma of battlefield resurrection.
We decoded the lunar highway, watching Umok biologically transform into a living, breathing antenna for the planet's memories, proving that star resonance makes history an active, physical force.
And finally, we descended into the Elixir Lakes, contrasting the agonizing, involuntary meat grinder of the Pharaoh rebirth with the profound, conscious sacrifice demanded by the rite of flame. Yaenddarr is an ecosystem of absolute consequence. Every intent is measured, every memory is recorded, and every trauma must eventually be processed. Which leaves me with a final, highly disturbing thought to leave you with as you go about the rest of your day.
Oh, let's hear it.
We've established that the Elixir waters, the lunar highway, and the very bark of the trees literally record and physicalize the memory, trauma, and intent of every single being that lives and dies on this world. The planet remembers everything. But what happens to the memories that the planet itself wants to forget?
Oh, wow.
If Yaenddarr is truly a living, breathing entity, then it must possess a subconscious. What dark, unspeakable traumas are buried deep in the planetary core? And what kind of apocalyptic nightmare would emerge if that planetary subconscious suddenly woke up?
That is a terrifying and entirely valid ecological question to leave hanging in the air.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive. Remember, whether you're looking at the starlight above you, the trees outside your window, or the reflection in an ancient lake, there is always an entire universe operating beneath the surface. Catch you next time.